All right, everyone. Philip has set up this dual main O2 tank system, and we're going to walk you through how this functions and how to operate it. Basically, you should only have one valve per tank, one tank open at a time. If you open both valves simultaneously, then it's going to equalize the pressures in both tanks. And that's not what we want. We want to be able to almost fully drain a tank, close it off, and then switch to a main. And then once that primary, whichever tank's in service, drains, then you always have a reserve. So you can shut that off, switch it over, and then as soon as possible, you should exchange that tank that was empty. So for example, right now this tank is in service. So this will be your primary tank, and it's open here. So if the valve's open, typically that means that tank is in service. If I were to open this valve, it would equalize the pressure from this tank to this tank, and we don't want to do that. So if I'm running this tank as my primary and this one's closed, that's kind of how I know it's my primary at this time, and this drains and gets empty. Now the tank theoretically will give consistent flows down to about 200 psi because that 200 psi is not usable oxygen. But I think this will alarm at 500, correct, Philip? But it will start alarming at 500. So that's ideally when you should know to shut your primary and switch it over. So that's just one of the most important pieces that we're going to talk about. You can, when you're checking your O2 off in the morning, basically go and look at the gauge and see which one's open, and whichever one's open is the one that's reading on the gauge, the pressure that's reading on the gauge. And if you want to check the pressure in the other tank, just to make sure, you would fully close the open one and then open the closed one. And then you could switch back to your primary. Okay? All right, everyone, so we're going to demonstrate what this would look like from inside of the ambulance. So let's imagine now that we have our primary tank open, which would be the one closest to us that I showed you earlier. This is the one that's in service. We've got 964 on our oxygen gauge. So as we're running out of oxygen, you can see that dropping. It's not going to drop that fast. We've just closed the valve to simulate. So we're delivering oxygen, treating a patient. And then we get our alarm, so we know that we need to switch it over now. So what I'm going to do is close the valve of the primary here, and I'm going to reach far in there where that secondary is, and I'm going to open that valve. So this is now closed. And I have open the valve on our secondary. So now that's in service, and the pressure that we're getting is through that secondary tank. And when we get back to the station, we will exchange our primary. Okay. And one last thing, make sure that when you're changing your tanks out, both of them have to be closed. The valves on this tank and the secondary, both valves have to be fully closed, otherwise air is just going to leak out of the full tank.